Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be looking at the difference between a hip hinge and a squat pattern, or more so kind of how to do the hip hinge. So a hip hinge is represented in movements like an RDL or a deadlift, where a squat pattern is obviously more for the squat, front squat. A lot of people think these movements are the same, but a hip hinge pattern is not the same, and when you do it in a squat, it can be okay for certain purposes, but not for others. So just a quick demo, a hip hinge pattern involves more hip motion and less knee motion. So when you're going here, the hips go back, the knees are going to bend just a little bit, but that's basically your hip hinge. You're pushing your butt back, flat back stays nice and flat, knees are going to bend a little bit. But that's what we got for a hip hinge position. A squat position has a slight similarity where the butt goes back initially first, but in a squat, the butt goes back and then we drop down. The reason a lot of this got confused is when people originally squatted, they just put their knees forward a lot of the times, which once again isn't necessarily bad, but for certain purposes, if you're trying to back squat, that's not the correct form for a back squat. So what happened is people just say hips back, hips back, hips back, until people started squatting and they were just doing that. And if you're trying to go below parallel, that becomes a little difficult when you're not really using your ankle motion. So a squat pattern has a lot of hip flexion and knee flexion, where a hip hinge has primarily hip flexion, not a lot of knee flexion. So once again, the hip hinge is more for a deadlift, RDL, kettlebell swing, different movements like that. And then obviously a squat pattern will have everything to do with a squat. So the few key pointers when looking at a hip hinge is one, the hips always move first and they move backwards. And two, the back stays flat. So if you're going like this, that's not really what you're looking for. You're kind of looking back flat. Imagine that you have like a steel rod going through your hip right here, so all you can do is move through your hip. So that's going to be your hip hinge pattern right there. This would be good for as well as just lifting things up off the floor that are a little heavier, because you're going to get a lot more force that way versus if you're just rounding to pick it up. Can be a little healthier for your back as well. The back is meant to flex and everything, but it's also good to kind of keep a braced spine, especially when you're lifting anything of weight. You can also use a squat pattern for that as well if you need to lift off the ground, right guys? One of the key things I see wrong when people are doing a hip hinge, especially with doing like an RDL, is even though they're hinging, the weight's still coming out way in front of them. So with an RDL, guys, the weight's going to come straight down, right between your knees, right between your feet. That way you're keeping the weight close to your body, which is the best mechanical advantage for you. Learning how to hip hinge can also be a great way to do other exercises to strengthen the glutes, as well as it will usually kind of help with back pain when you start kind of stretch or working on the glutes and things like that. So one of the favorite ones you can do to practice the hip hinge is just starting on your knees, because then it takes your bottom part of your leg out, and you're essentially just leaning your butt back to your heels and then back up. So once again, guys, the back should still stay flat. So with this, as the butt goes back, the torso comes forward. So this is a great exercise right here just to practice that. You can also attach a band, which will give you a little resistance. That's just a great way to look at it, guys. Overall, that's kind of the main difference between a hip hinge and a squat pattern. And that's just one quick exercise you can do if you're having trouble kind of disassociating the back with the hips. Give it a try, guys. Make sure you subscribe and let me know what you guys want to see next.